10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على حضرة سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا أكرم الأكرمين. So we pick up inshallah from where we left off at page 87. We spoke about all matters that are included in any book of any type of science. They're basically, they come down to two categories that I have no third. Either they're conceptualizations or they are propositions. Conceptualizations are treated through definitions. Propositions are established through evidence or syllogisms. Syllogisms like the ones we presented earlier. طيب. So then the author on page 88, he delves directly and says فالإيراد الذي يتوجه على الأول مضبوط إذ هو إما بأن التعريف المقيد له غير منطبق عليه أو غير محمول عليه أو على ما هو أخفى من المعرف أو explain in full after I read أو على ما هو مثله في المعرفة والجهالة أو مشتمل على الدور أو غيرها. So the approach that Shaykh Ahmed al-Ghifari takes is basically he takes a form of it's very similar to critical thinking. Some works of logic, they conclude by speaking about fallacies or gaps, you may call them as such as well, by speaking about the different sorts of mughalatat, different sorts of fallacies and problems in reasoning and so on and so forth. They usually conclude the art of logic by speaking about fallacies. They don't begin with speaking about fallacies. The Western approach now for critical thinking, it's primarily on fallacies and the different categorizations of it, different distinctions, and so on and so forth. So in the books of, in some of the treatises of logic, some of the mutun, the primers of logic, they conclude by speaking about different sorts of fallacies. طيب. Now, what Shaykh Ahmed al-Ghifari did was he sort of took what they conclude logic with and made that an introduction to the art of reading. So it becomes like he's using a critical thinking approach to reading. And he's saying, consider some of the problems that would come up in definitions. After he categorized the types of knowledge that is present in books, either conceptualization or propositional, he then said, now the problems that may come up in any of these two are the following. So then he started to list the problems that could come up in definitions, and he listed I think I read بأن التعريف المقيد, apologize, that's تعريف المفيد, بأن التعريف المفيد له غير منطبق. I apologize there, I'm I guess the sleeping that we talked about before, but anyways, so he mentioned some of the problems with definitions, right? He mentioned, for example, he said التعريف, meaning he is speaking about the definition, المفيد له غير منطبق, meaning it's okay. So they have this concept in definitions that any definition has to match the concept that it is defining. So it shouldn't be more specific than the concept or more general. It has to be identical. So this is what you do is tatbiq, because you get one part aligned with the other, folded and aligned. خلاص? So he's saying that if the definition is not fully aligned, how would the definition, how would it not be fully aligned if the definition is more specific than the concept, or that the definition is more general than the concept, then they're not fully aligned. It's like when you fold a piece of paper and then you have one half that's not really a half, so it's not accurately folded. So this is what he's talking about, meaning you have to look for whether there are individuations of the concept that are not encompassed by the definition, or individuations of things that are outside of the concept that are encompassed by the definition. When I say individuations, so let me just, I'm going to come up with something random now, not something from books of knowledge, but just to, okay. So let's say, for example, that we were to define the participants who came today to this workshop or class on Adab al-Mutala'a as every human being who came to Nashr Quran Complex on the 20th of February 2023. Now, this is too general because some people came to the complex today who are not attending. See? So it includes individuals that are beyond the concept of participants in Adab al-Mutala'a. See? But if I say, for example, every man that came to the workshop on Adab al-Mutala'a at Nashr Quran Complex, and that wouldn't include the ladies. Right? So then some of the individuals of my concept are now not included within it because my definition, the way I define the concept, is more specific than the reality. Okay? Concepts are basically realities. So realities, they're abstract, but they have what we call individuations. Meaning, if I define, let's say, for example, a planet. So I'm defining a planet. So a planet is just a planet. But then a planet can be Pluto, can be Saturn, can be Mars, can be Earth, can be Venus. It can be a planet in the solar system, in other systems, other galaxies, see? So concepts are, in a sense, abstract realities. And these abstract realities, they have what we call individuations, meaning individual examples, in a sense, of that reality. Okay? So, again, if the definition is too specific, then some of the individuals of this reality are not included. If it's too general, some of the individuals of some other reality are now included under this one. So it's inaccurate, either too general or too specific. It has to be aligned. خلاص? This is just a very casual way. You can understand it this way. طيب. How would that actually happen technically? If it's too general, then there might be a qualifier not included. Like when I said every person who came to Nashr Quran Complex, I didn't add a qualifier to Adab al-Mutala'a. See, I didn't add that qualifier. And if it's too specific, then it includes a qualifier that shouldn't be there. When I said every man, and I didn't say every human, so I included a qualifier that shouldn't originally be part in the definition. Qualifiers in Arabic are called قيود, which is جمع قيد. They say التعريف له قيود, meaning qualifiers. And these qualifiers are what are responsible for the alignment between the definition and the concept being defined. خلاص? I hope that is clear, inshallah. طيب. He said أو على ما هو أخفى من المعرف. أخفى من المعرف, meaning I cannot include in the definition a word that is more ambiguous than what I'm actually defining. Why do we define? We define concepts for two reasons. Either to convey the reality, to communicate the reality to others, or, sure. Yes, they're responsible for that alignment. That's the role of the qualifier, to make sure that yes, exactly. To make sure that they are perfectly aligned, not more and not less. أخفى من المعرف, if we use a word that is more ambiguous. So, because definitions are sought for the sake of clarity. So if you're using a word that is ambiguous in a definition, then you're not really clarifying, you're making things worse. Somebody's asking you, what does this mean? So now you bring a definition that includes a word that is even more ambiguous than what you were trying to define. So هذه الظلمات بعضها فوق بعض, these layers of darkness in a sense. So أو على ما هو مثله في المعرفة والجهالة, meaning a word that is equivalent in terms of whether it's unknown, of the same level. So it doesn't have to be more ambiguous. But if it's also ambiguous in and of itself, of the same level of ambiguity of the word being defined, that's still wrong. So in other words, what he's trying to say here, definitions always have to include words that are more obvious, that are clearer than the word being defined. They cannot be as ambiguous or more ambiguous. Maybe you can use another word than ambiguous, unknown or unclear, or have a hidden. The meaning is not apparent. أو مشتمل على الدور. One of the contemporary Salafi shuyukh rahimahullah wa ghafara lahu defined, when he came to speak about the jurisprudential analogy, al-qiyas, so he said, al-qiyas is ilhaqu hukm al-asli bil-fara', to apply the ruling of the original case, that is the asl, to the one similar to it, that we call that al-fara'. We treat the original case as like a trunk of a tree, and the new case that is similar to it, we call it a branch, even though they're identical, right? In a sense, identical from the perspective of the ruling, because they have the same, in their core, they have the same meaning. So this is how he defined the qiyas. طيب, okay. Now we apply the ruling of matter A to matter B because of a commonality. خلاص, okay. طيب, what is al-asl? He said, al-asl هو المقيس عليه, the one by which we base the analogy on. Okay. طيب, what is al-fara'? He said al-maqis, the one that is based on the asl. So you defined al-asl al-maqis alayh. طيب, what is al-fara'? Al-maqis. How does that help? This is like vicious cycle. This is circular reasoning. Because the definition now of al-fara' depends on the definition of al-asl, and the definition of al-asl depends on the definition of al-fara'. So he rounded up not defining anything. Rahimahullah. That was Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen in al-usul, fi ilm al-usul. And Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen is considered of the nicest of them. And in terms of language, he was the most knowledgeable of them in language as well. He has a sharh on the Alfiyah. And I don't think of anyone of his generation authored a sharh on al-Alfiyah in grammar. But because of their resentment towards logic and the rational sciences, Safiuddin, I believe, when he reached the point to speak about jurisprudential analogy, al-qiyas, this chapter in fiqh is one of the key, in usul fiqh, one of the key chapters that actually through them you can actually tell whether how solid one is in usul fiqh or not. So he found a lot of applications of logic and so on and so forth. He said, this is a complication of the matter, and we don't have to do this. And he concluded his sharh, and he didn't finish the book. You can double check if you go online and listen to the audio recordings of قواعد الأصول ومعاقد الفصول. He didn't get to finish the book. I don't mean to make this about Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, but my point here is when people reject logic and the rational sciences, this is what they fall into, right? So he defined, he made the definition of al-asl based on the definition of al-fara', and made the definition of al-fara' based on the definition of al-asl. So he rounded up not defining any of the two. So it should not include any. This is what we call dawr, circular reasoning. To say the definition of A depends on the definition of B. Like, we come to define B. We find that the definition of B depends on the definition of A. What do you want? And yes, this is what we call casually, exactly, going in circles. Exactly. Yes. Nigri in circles. Huh? I'm sorry? La ilaha illallah. Can we turn this on? I'm starting to melt a little bit here. And then we're going to turn it on, and then it's going to be too cold. But anyways, khalas. This is what I'm talking about at the beginning. But khayr la bas. Okay, so these are examples of and then he mentioned also on page 92 وإما بأن الألفاظ المستعملة فيه, meaning in the definition, الألفاظ المستعملة, meaning the vocables that are used in the definition, غير خالية عن ارتكاب التجوز أو الاشتراك أو التكرار, meaning they include figurative language, they include what we call al-mushtarak al-lafzi, words that have more than one meaning, and each one of them is sort of used literally. This is like in Arabic, the word ayn. Ayn can mean a spy. It can mean ayn al-shams, the sun. It can mean an item. It obviously can mean an eye. Right? So this is what we call mushtarak lafzi. So you're not supposed to use words as such in definitions. You're not supposed to use figurative language in definitions. So I cannot define easy as kachang. See? That doesn't work. Why? Because it's figurative. You like that? Yes. Okay. Satisfied. And it's in academic context as well. Subhan al-Malik al-Quddus. طيب. أو التكرار, you're not supposed to repeat words because or he said أو غيرها, meaning there are, in other words, fallacies can be of different sorts, but he mentioned a number of key problems that would occur in definitions. Now, before we go into problems that would occur in propositions, why did he do that? He's saying that a reader, if you encounter the author defining any concept or reality, you ought to examine the definition and make sure that it doesn't include any of these problems. Right? So in other words, you have to analyze the definition. Does it include figurative language? Does it include ishtirak lafzi? Does it include ambiguity? Does it include words that are unclear? Does it include circular reasoning? Does any of that? You have to make sure that it doesn't include any of these. This is important because of the approach that he will use later on. Until now, he didn't describe how should we go about reading the book. This is basically, if we take these pages off from the book, it becomes like an appendix or the conclusion of a logic text. See? And what is he saying here implicitly? You cannot do Adab al-Mutala'a correctly if you don't have any background in logic. We'll come later on to speak about the disciplines that are needed to practice adab al-mutala'a within the Islamic tradition. See? So, this is something of related to adab al-mutala'a. Scholars in Islam, they don't, when they want to say something, they don't do billboards. You have to study logic. You have to study logic. You have to study logic. No. They don't spoon feed stuff, right? They don't spoon feed knowledge. They mention things implicit and sometimes by the style. So we learn from the order of the book. If the muqaddimah is on logic, right? So that means that the entirety of the science or the field, the art of deep reading depends on logic. So you cannot really practice it that well unless you already studied logic. Then somebody should ask me a question here related to circular reasoning. You need to find it out. There is a question that should be asked. I feel it's gonna, the eureka moment. A question about circular reasoning. We're saying logic has to be studied before the أيوة. Okay. Yes. But in order? Good man. Yes, exactly. See? But, okay, how do we come out of this circular reasoning? Correct. You don't have to take it through a book. You can take it verbally. You don't have to do it through a book. You can do it verbally. So the art of logic can be acquired through verbal teaching. Okay. طيب.
From what we see from the Islamic tradition, like we critic
the author. He sort of like delved immediately into the critique. Correct? This has two reasons. One, I have another book called إحياء سند العلم. So there's a treatise in there by Al-Muwaffaq ibn Butlan. Maybe I can, tomorrow or something, today, we can take out the chapter of the book and give it out. But only to the participants, because I don't want to put that, I don't have permission to put that online. Right.
I think that the student not committed to read book alone, they must have guidance.
True. I'll get to this very point. So in إحياء سند العلم, there's a chapter. This chapter is written by a Christian author, Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan. So Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan was a Christian physician who studied with Abu al-Faraj ibn al-Tayyib, who was they call him like the chief of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Abu al-Faraj ibn al-Tayyib. Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan was a student of him. طيب. Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan, as I said, he's a Christian physician who, by the way, he had the kunya of Abu al-Hasan, like some of the priests would do. So Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan, he got into a sort of debate with an Egyptian Muslim physician. I can't recall the name at the moment, but I can find out, inshallah, at the end. Or I can't remember his name. So this Egyptian Muslim physician, he wasn't actually a physician. He was a philosopher who couldn't have ends meet, couldn't put food on the table based on philosophy. So he said, you know what? Okay, I will use philosophy to, make people to read books of medicine, and I can treat people. So he studied philosophy, started to treat people. People, for some reason, believed him. He worked up the ladder until he became like the chief physician in Egypt. And he used to critique Abu Bakr al-Razi and Ibn Sina, and didn't have respect for those pioneers of medicine. Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan got very, got fired up, because of that. And they used to debate on matters of, medicine. So once Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan told him, you come with these weird opinions because you never studied with a teacher. So this guy doesn't stop there. He said, we don't need teachers. He said, no, Mukhtar ibn Butlan told him, how come? He said, I will actually write a book that it's better to earn knowledge from books, not from teachers. Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan is like, what is this dude now? So he authored a book, Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan, designated each chapter to make a counter case against this Muslim physician. One of the chapters included 7 syllogisms like these, not based on the Sharia or anything. He's not a Muslim after all. 7 syllogisms, مقدمتين, نتيجة, that it is better to acquire knowledge from shuyukh, teachers, rather than books. Right? He proved it logically, rationally speaking. Right? What happened in the Muslim tradition, that the scholars accepted the Christian argument, the Christian physician, and didn't agree with that Muslim physician. So you find Salahuddin al-Safadi in Al-Wafi bil-Wafayat writes a summary of that chapter and supports Al-Mukhtar ibn Butlan, to the point that Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd, Salafi, included in Hilyat Talib al-Ilm, his book on, the etiquette of Talib al-Ilm and so on and so on, which has issues that are not in line with the, pure Sunni tradition. But even a Salafi Shaykh included in his book the words of the Christian physician against the Muslim physician. See? That you ought to study with teachers and not to take from books directly. So, having said that, Waid al-Haram, he speaks about this. He speaks about the 3 malakat, and he says that malakatul istihsal, the capacity to acquire knowledge, begins by learning from the shuyukh directly. You don't move into interpretation or inference, nor critique. First, you learn from the verbal, and you learn from them the introductories, and then you move to learn how to interpret. All of that before the critique. Hamid al-Ghifari, he was focused on a high level. So he entered the issue from a high level immediately. It seems that maybe in his time it wasn't an issue. Maybe in his time he found that the problem is at that level of critique. This is what people need, because they were already doing adab bahth wa munadhara and so on and so forth. So this was his concern. Not to exclude the other thing, the acquiring from the shuyukh. So in my opinion, Al-Allama Hamid al-Ghifari took that approach because that was the need only. So, but yes, we agree with Mortimer Adler that a beginner would not begin with that. Okay, yeah. بارك الله فيكم مولانا. And then he said وعلى الثاني أيضا, page 93, وعلى الثاني أيضا كذلك لأنه إما أن يكون الدليل المفيد له غير مستلزم له، أو بعض مقدماته، أو كلها مدخولة على التفصيل والتعيين، أو كونه على الإجمال مستلزما لفساد، أو جاريا في صورة يتخلف عنها الحكم، أو كونه مما يقام على خلاف مقتضاه دليل. Um, طيب. So here he says that in terms of the proof, the evidence that scholars would provide, that could include the problems such as, and then he mentioned some of them. One, that the evidence doesn't, that the conclusion, which is the proposition, is not actually necessitated from the premises. The premises, they're not linked together in a way that would give the conclusion. Or some of the premises are problematic, meaning they're not established, right? Meaning the individual, when he says على التفصيل والتعيين, meaning the detailed individual premises are not actually fully established. Or that generally speaking, that this sort of evidence necessitates or entails a problem in reasoning. Or this evidence relates to an example or an individual case that the proposition or the claim is not applicable to. Sometimes there are matters of exception. So if you take that matter of exception and you make it the principle, then that becomes a problem. Or that there is an actual proof or evidence that is established against what the author is providing. This is generally speaking. So here he moves from the definitions and gets into the kind of problems that may, again, he's not listing all the problems, the kind of problems that may appear against a dalil, against an evidence. Either the evidence is not coherent, the syllogism is not coherent, it doesn't follow, the premises do not yield the conclusion that the author is claiming that they yield, or some of the premises include fallacies or not fully established. Or, so this is ala tafsil, this is in details, right? They're not fully established. Or that generally speaking, this proof entails, would imply, would indicate a problematic position. Or that it again it follows an exception, so it's not the proof for that principle. Or as we said at the end, that there is a proof that is established against it. طيب. Or, and then he said وإما بكونه دافعا لتلك الأمور المتوجهة على ذلك وعلى الأول أيضا. So in other words, he's building up to what will come afterwards. He's basically saying that we can go in cycles, meaning you go through a definition, the definition is problematic, as he will explain now. Then what you will do, basically, just in very simple terms, what Allama Hamid Ghifari is saying, you're gonna put yourself in the opponent's shoes, position, and you imagine that the author is there. The author is, sending you the claims that he's making. You will critique him. After you critique him, you're gonna get up, put yourself in his shoes, and then respond to your critique. So this is why he said afterwards, al-maqsad, he said, إذا شرعت في المطالعة فانظر في المبحث من أوله إلى آخره نظرا إجماليا. This is Mortimer Adler says something like that. He says when you skim, or scanning, I think that's a word that he uses, to skim through the chapter from beginning to end. He says إجماليا, just a general broad scanning. على وجه ينتقش في ذهنك المعنى المراد منه ظاهرا, so that you can understand the surface meaning of the passage, for example. Yes, sure. He will actually mention it here. You'll see. So first level, first step, and this is, as I said, this is, similar to, or Mortimer Adler is similar to this one. So you read the paragraph, you read the passage, you read the mabhath, you read the matter from the book, on the surface meaning. At this point, you're not supposed to stop to question the definition, the evidence, anything of that. This is just to develop a sense of what is being discussed only. Right. Then you're gonna do at least two more readings. First one said ثم لاحظ الأمور التصورية بدقة النظر واستبصره فيها هل يرد عليه أمر من الأمور القادحة فيها. Now you're gonna examine the conceptualizations only and figure out if there are any problems within the definitions or the conceptualizations. All right? And then he says وهل يمكن دفعها ودفع ما يدفع ذلك الدفع. And then consider, okay, come up with a critique and then find out if that critique can be responded to. And then that response, consider a critique against and consider if that critique can be responded to. He will later on come to, to indicate that these sort of back and forth, the more prolonged that cycle of going back and forth, the more the deeper you enter the text. This sort of back and forth between you are the opponent of the author and then you are the proponent. Opponent and proponent, back and forth. So some people can do it like 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, depending on how you grasp the mastery. And you find that in the hawashi, especially in the super commentaries. Sometimes a little bit in the commentaries, but then in the super commentaries you find that back and forth. So you find in the super commentaries, they say وَيَرِدُ عَلَيْهِ كَذَا وَيُدْفَعُ بِكَذَا. So they will bring out the critique and then they respond to the critique. And sometimes they respond to the response. See? And then having done that with the conceptualizations, then you do that with the propositions or the claims. Same thing. ولاحظ الأمور التصديقية أيضا بدقة النظر واستبصره فيها هل يتوجه عليه شيء من الأشياء التي تقدح فيها وهل يسوء التفصي عنها والتفصي عن ذلك التفصي. Again, so basically it means consider the claims, find out if these claims have any critiques that may be posed against these claims, try to answer the critiques, try to respond to the answers of the critique. This is about 500 years ago was authored. This is how deep they got into the books. And the problem is that now it's not only that we don't apply that in reading, we don't apply that in teaching either. Like to allow a back and forth and a critique and layers of critique and responses and so on and so forth. That is no longer applied, unfortunately. By the way, this was reflected in how they authored. I mentioned, for example, on page near the end, I went in length, but near the end of page 96 and into page 97, I said وهذه الطريقة استعملها أساطين الفهم والمعرفة في مطالعة أصحاب المؤلفات وأدقها كالعلامة سعد الدين التفتزاني. فقد وصف العلامة قنالي زادة رضي الله عنه عمل السعد التفتزاني في حاشيته على الكشاف لجار الله الزمخشري فقال وكثيرا ما ترى العلامة التفتزاني يوجه كلام كشافي بتقرير يندفع به اعتراض أبي حيان ولا يصرح به ولا يدرى أنه اطلع على تفسيره وإعرابه أم يغوص بقوة فكره على السؤال وجوابه. This is one of the Ottoman historians. He was writing about a scholar named Taftazani. This scholar, he made a super commentary on a tafsir of the Quran. This tafsir is known as Al-Kashaf, written by Az-Zamakhshari, who's a Mu'tazili scholar. So, Taftazani wrote a super commentary on that. طيب. So this Ottoman scholar, historian, what is he saying? He's saying when we read the book of Taftazani, we find him bringing up questions and responding to them. And then we find that these questions are present in a book of a scholar named Abu Hayyan, who was critical of Az-Zamakhshari. Then the kick here is that, that the historian is saying, and we do not know, did Taftazani actually read the work by Abu Hayyan and he's like responding to it? Or it's coincidental, and that Taftazani was doing that by the power of his mind. He said, بِقُوَّةِ فِكْرِهِ. So he brings up the possible critiques and he responds to them. Right? So there is a vicious cycle between how our scholars used to author, which dictates how we should read, and then how we read would dictate how we author. I usually say every style of writing dictates a style of reading. And then that style of reading would usually yield a similar style of writing as well. And this is how the tradition keeps on going. So the books are authored in a way that they're not accessible unless you read them in a particular way. If you don't read them in that way, you will not reach anywhere. Then he said, ولاحظ الأشياء القادحة الموردة عليها هل هي متوجهة؟ فإن ظهرت غير متوجهة فلا تلتفت إليها إلا أن يكون المورد عظيم الشان فتوقف حينئذ بتكريره ثم المطارحة مع الأقران ثم بالعرض على المشايخ وإلا فاستبصر في دفعها ودفع ما يدفعه. طيب, he's saying that it may appear sometimes, critiques that may appear that are irrelevant. طيب? So he's saying ignore the irrelevant critiques. I mean, why should we pay attention to irrelevant critiques? He said, except if the one who's making that seemingly irrelevant critique, a scholar of a high caliber. He said, then pause, توقف, repeat, keep reading it. If it happens that now you understand, okay. If you don't and you still find it irrelevant, consult your peers. If that doesn't work, go to the shaykh. If they don't satisfy your intrigueness, your inquiry, then or that was not that sort of process was not possible. You don't have peers, or you couldn't reach the shaykh. Then wait and continue considering, that critique and the response to it and so on and so forth. Now note something here. This is something about pedagogy. Sometimes, when I teach books in the original language, and then comes somebody and says, Shaykh, what does this word mean? So I usually say something, politely. I'm not a dictionary. I could answer, right? But why are you asking me if you can open Mukhtar al-Sahah or Google, right? So we're getting into this habit of asking, simple questions. These questions you're not meaning of a word. So again, I'm talking about the original language, right? So there's no language barrier. So what they need to do, open Mukhtar al-Sahah. When you find a problem, then come. Say, Shaykh, look, I couldn't understand this word. So when they ask simple questions that they can find out on their own, tell them, how about you look it up and come and show me? but don't give the direct answer. So here he said, number one, try on your own. Repeat. Reflect. Contemplate. Doesn't work. Ask your peers. Now that doesn't work. You guys discuss together and it's not working. We cannot satisfy, find a satisfying answer. Then you go to the Shaykh. So this is what Maulana Ahmed al-Ghifari is actually saying. That students used to repeat on their own. When they don't find the answer, they go ask their peers and their classmates. And they would have discussion. And then they come to the Shaykh and say, look, Shaykh, we have this problem. We have this issue. We tried to solve it. I found this. Zayd found this. Amr found that. And we couldn't reconcile. What do you think? Then the Shaykh gives the opinion. See, this is how people learn. Right? But again, because they're not treating knowledge like fast food. Like 2 minutes are passing and I still didn't know the meaning of the word. No. It's not like that. You have to make the effort. And you have to show the effort as well. So again, I find sometimes some students, because they take that easy route, they sometimes miss on opportunities from benefiting from some of their teachers. Why? Because they keep asking simple questions. The teacher may be polite or too shy to be assertive with a student. I'm not saying be violent with a student. I'm not saying that. But the teacher should be, how about you look it up and show me what you find? Right? Some teachers are shy to even say that. So they answer the student. You think you're benefiting the student this way, you're not. You're making the student always dependent upon you. As a teacher, you teach and benefit, but you also empower. So if you always have the student depending on you, when will they be independent? You have to help them have a sense of autonomy. Otherwise, they will remain dependent on you. Okay, God, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you long life, but after you pass away, and then they come through a word that you don't know. What, they're going to come you to a grave, recite the Fatiha. Shaykh, I don't know the meaning of the word. Can you come please in a dream and tell me? Allahu Akbar. If the Shaykh is from the awliya, yeah, he will come and tell him, don't come back again. You have to buy a dictionary, ya Habib. He will send him somebody with some money or somebody to give him a gift of Mukhtar al-Sahah. Don't come again, Andy. Yeah. You get my point. So, by the way, you do this with your kids as well. Not every time they ask something, we provide. We do with them like we do with the food. How about you look it up and show me what you found? Sometimes a teacher, you have to be a facilitator, not just spoon feeding. Exactly. Yeah. This is what they're supposed to do. So part of teaching is to empower, not just to, give the knowledge or provide it or explain it. You have to empower them. Empower them sometimes you have to create artificial challenges for them. I mentioned in one of these, let me see. I mentioned an example from الطبقات الشافعية. Okay. Maybe it's on the sharh. Let me see. Okay, so just for the time's sake, I'll in طبقات الشافعية by Tajuddin al-Subki, he said that his, I still can't find it, but I'm just going through as I explain it. He said that his father, Taqi al-Subki, would gather, would ask him to come, because Tajuddin Subki is a student of his father. So he used to ask him and his peers to prepare a fiqhi mas'ala. And what he would do is he would divide them into two groups, Group A and Group B. And then he would ask Group A, he would assign Group A a position. And then he would assign Group B with another position. And then he would say, okay, debate. And Taqi Subki would be sitting like that, watching them, how they debate. And then after a while, then stop. Switch. You guys take that up, the position that you are attacking, and you take the position, switch positions. So those who are defending a position, now they have to attack it. And those who are attacking a position, now they have to defend it. So they used to do that for a while. And then they would stop and then turn to him and ask him, okay, so what's your opinion? So then he would start establishing a third position. That is in Tabaqat Shafi'i al-Kubra. And then after he starts to establish a third position, they go like, oh, so this is the right one. He says, no. And then he would counter that position and establish a fourth one. This is how they used to learn. And in the biographies of teachers of Al-Qadi Iyad, the author of Al-Shifa, he's also an author of a book called At-Tanbihat al-Mustanbata. It's the interpreted remarks. It's a book that serves the magnum opus, in a sense, of the Maliki madhab called Al-Mudawwana. And nobody served Al-Mudawwana as a Qadi Iyad. So he mentioned that amongst of his teachers, some teachers that he read with them Al-Mudawwana on the basis of Adab al-Bahth wal-Munadhara. So قرأت عليه المدونة قراءة بحث ومناظرة. So meaning the teacher would allow him to read it as a form of a debate. So they take every single mas'ala in the Mudawwana and turn it into a debate. This is how they read the book together. This is now, it's not done. Where is the teacher who will actually bring a student and say, look, now let's take this Minhaj al-Nawawi, نقرأ مناظرة مسألة ونتناظر فيها. See, but this is how they used to read the books, even with their teachers. So their teacher would allow the student. But again, obviously, this is an advanced level reading. I mean, they wouldn't begin with that, right? But this is what we should be aspiring to. I know now we aspire that, Shaykh, we just need to finish al-Minhaj of any way, any sort, any form, with anyone. But in 5 days, that too. Some of the scholars of our Ummah, this is just a side note. In a book called Tartib al-Ulum by Sadiq Zada, he mentions a reality that happened, that some of the scholars became, how do I say this, too busy with the intricacies of the ulum to the point that they missed out on some of the things related, for example, to the Quran, fiqh, and so on and so forth, or something like that. But so they get so much into the rational sciences that they become extremely overoccupied with these details. I believe a teacher of my teacher, if I recall correctly, from Mosul and north of Iraq, he found a piece of paper that has a verse of the Mawarith from Surah An-Nisa. But he thought it was he didn't read it. He thought it was a matn. So he came to the Shaykh and said, Ya Shaykh, I found this excellent matn on inheritance. And he started to, do the, interpretation of it as if he's explaining a matn. And he didn't know it's a verse from the Quran. But I'm not saying that example to say, follow that, but I'm saying we reach that sort of, you may call it an extreme level into the so detailed, intricate level of reading that to the point that some of them missed on some of the important things. Again, we don't have to follow that necessarily, but just to appreciate their attention, yani. Okay. Then he said فإذا نظرت فيه من أوله, this is page 100, إذا نظرت فيه من أوله إلى آخره على هذا الوجه فلا يخلو حالك عن الأمور الثلاثة. He said if you follow this approach in reading, then you're going to be one of three people. One, either that you won't find any critiques. You won't be able to come up with any critiques. And he says either that because you're not at that level yet, or the author is like super good that you cannot find any possible critique to come up with. Number two, that you find critiques that are actually responded to, that they're not valid critiques. Third, that you may find critiques that are actually relevant and applicable. وإما أن تكون واجد الأشياء الغير مدفوعة. He says ولا قصور في شيء من هذه الأحوال إلا في الحالة الأولى إذا كانت ناشئة عن القصور. He says it's fine if you find critiques that have responses. It's also fine if you have critiques that have no responses. The worst case is if you cannot come up with any critiques whatsoever. He said, if you cannot come up with any critiques because of your, weakness in knowledge. Now, some people, some of the Muslim liberals, secularists, they say the Islamic tradition, these books of fiqh and books of hadith, these yellow books, old books, these are dogmatic. They don't teach you to think, have a critical mind. Be open to different ideas. And we say, yes, read this. See? On one hand, we have a role in there because we made some books obsolete, like this one, so we don't apply it. And the thing is like, okay, so they look at the Turath through us. So they see us, we don't do debates like we used to. We get into fights on Facebook, but we don't do actual proper debates as they're supposed to be done. They don't find in the books that we write actual engagement with topics and back and forth and laying out the different opinions and responding to them and giving the due service to your opponent before you give the due service to your own positions and doing. They don't find that. So they assume that our ancestors are like us. And that's the problem. When we present ourselves as an image of the Turath, but we're not. So we have to sometimes be realistic. I won't say be humble. Be realistic. Distance yourself from the Turath. We love the Turath, yes, but we're not an image of it. So in the Turath, we're not supposed to be dogmatic. Here, a Muslim scholar is saying in the 10th century, if you read a book and you cannot come up with a critique, then you are at a low level in knowledge. See? So they don't have to preach to us about critical thinking. Habibi, look, not being able to critically think for us was an indicator that the person has a long way to go in knowledge. And it's not this critical thinking books and so on and so forth. Don't think it's that approach was already applied in our ummah. And then he said, okay, so what if you cannot come up with critiques? He said, فَلَا تُفْتِرُ جَدَّكَ أو فَلَا يَفْتُرُ جَدُّكَ في جدك في ذلك. So meaning don't, if the case that you cannot come up with critiques, don't give up. Al-futur meaning, خلاص, losing the energy, losing the enthusiasm. He's saying don't lose the enthusiasm to actually read. and come up with critiques. He says, فانظر في المبحث من أوله إلى آخره على الوجه الذي أريناك. Read the passage, the matter that you're reading from beginning to end according to the way that we explain to you. فإن ظهر عليك القصور, again, if you find yourself below that level, again, don't stop, try again. انظر في المبحث الثاني والثالث. He said, وهكذا إلى أن يحصل لك الكمال. Continue persevering. And then he says, فإنك لست من الذين قد محاهم المخاطبون عن دفاترهم. He says, you're not concealed. It's not, he's saying the authors didn't mean to veil the knowledge from you. Don't take it personal. When he says that, فإنك لست, you, فإنك لست ممن محاهم المخاطبون عن دفاترهم. المخاطبون meaning those who speak, meaning the authors. محاهم meaning it's not like they erased you from being able to understand what they're saying. Don't take it personal. Try again. He says, وإذا وقع جدك في المطالعة على هذا النهج سنة أو سنتين لا أظنك أن لا ترتقي في المطالعة إلى حيث تقدر على تمييز المقبول من المردود. He's saying, if you follow this approach for a year or two, I don't think that you would ever fall short from achieving that level. Now here, this is a clear statement that students need to learn how to read a book, and they may spend actually 2 or 3 years learning how to. This is why we said before 10 years. Not 10 years for reading, but 10 years of scholarship. This is actually something that is historically proven, in a sense, that human beings, they need between 10 to 20, not less than 10 normally. From 10 to 20 years to become true scholars in any field. You can look at it, whether Muslims or non-Muslims, this is something out there. I think Ibn Miskawayh, he wrote that in one of his books. He said that it was the norm for philosophers, meaning Greek philosophers, for example, that they will need to spend from 10 to 20 years to actually to become a philosopher. Yeah, so somebody who enters college, for example, on the age of 18, for them to be like a prestigious physician, how long would they need? 20 years. 20 years. We find physicians who actually, there are exceptions, but maybe 10. But can somebody be, at the age of 23, 24, a pioneer in medicine? Again, how many people you find them of that sort? But the rest, people usually spark when they are, late 30s, mid 40s. Right? That's normal human beings, Muslims or non-Muslims. And this is why there is an approach in our tradition not to author before 40. And some people even apply it to teaching, not to teach before reaching 40 years old. But that is too much. Because sometimes you learn through teaching as well. But there are scholars who abstain from writing or teaching, meaning like disseminating knowledge before the age of 40. There were those exceptions. But the point here is you need about 10 to 20 years to actually become something, that you have something to say, basically. Yes, thank you. Yeah, because also part of our tradition, being a polymath is I say a polymath, being a polymath is a condition. It's not an achievement in our tradition. It's not an achievement. Any student, any scholar, before being a pioneer in any field, they have to be a polymath. So it's a prerequisite, basically. Then he mentioned some what we call tanbihat, like reminiscence. He said الأول لم يتيسر ذلك إلا بعد استحضار أصول المناظرة وقوانين البحث. He's saying you cannot achieve perfectly آداب المطالعة unless you have some background in آداب البحث, because the way you read, you're gonna apply this debating methodology. for some of the scholars who said we may actually have a matter a matter of a field or a science or of a discipline that is necessarily known, because scholars said things that are known necessarily, they're not part of a field of knowledge, basically. So when they are mentioned in books, they don't mean to actually establish it because it's already established, but they make a reminiscent of it, just their reminders. He said, فَعَدَمُ وُجْدَانِ الشَّيْءِ فِيهِ عِنْدَ الْمُطَالَعَةِ لا يقدح في شيء. Saying, sometimes they would refer you to something that is necessarily known to remind you. So if you don't find a critique, don't be surprised because it's necessarily known. So there shouldn't be a critique. الثالث إذا رجعت في دفع ما يدغدغ أو ما يدغدغ في صدرك إلى مشاهير العصر لم يكن به بأس بل هو أليق أولى. See, he says matters that are he says things that literally, he's saying matters that tickle you in your chest, meaning you have like eagerness and zeal. You really want to find out what is the right, position on that. He said, then you ought to reach out to the pioneers of your time, not just your teacher. He said, إلى مشاهير العصر, not just your teacher, meaning the pioneers of the ummah at this particular time. He says that is no problem in doing that. بل هو أليق وأولى. He says that is what you're supposed to do. And this is why they used to travel to ask a question. Sayyid Sharif Jurjani read a book about 3-4 times, but then he traveled to Egypt to read it with the author, Mubarak Shah. But he read it, and when he came to Mubarak Shah, he was a published author. Al-Abhari studied with Jamal al-Din al-Mawsili, studied with him when he was a published author. Athir al-Din al-Abhari, the author of Izahuji, he went to al-Mawsili to study with him. Al-Mawsili knew of sciences that no other scholar of his time knew of. Jamal al-Din al-Mawsili, if you read his biography from Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya al-Kubra, you'd be really surprised. When they list the number of sciences, and they say that he used to know sciences that no other scholar of his time knew. And Athir al-Din al-Abhari, when he traveled to study with him, he already authored, I think, Hidayatul Hikmah, which is it became later on the Ottoman textbook for philosophy. But when he went, he was a published author. His books were being taught, and then he served him as a student. And then they asked him mostly about Athir al-Din al-Abhari, what do you think of his caliber? Guess what he said? He said, I don't know. We never debated. How would I know? He never debated me. So he's expecting from the student to debate. See? But Sayyid Sharif, he traveled to Egypt to study the book with the author. Could you imagine? And he already studied that book. He already studied that book for about four times or something. But Mubarak Shah was a very well-known author in his time, was like the top logician of his time. So Sayyid Sharif he said, look, those students of that famous teacher, it's like this. It's like studying with students of Shaykh Ali Jum'ah, right? But then you say, no, I want to study with Shaykh Ali Jum'ah himself. That type of thing. That's not enough. So this is literally what Sayyid Sharif Jurjani did. He studied with one of the teachers, other teachers, and so on and so forth, 4 times. خلاص يعني. And Sayyid Sharif is is a top scholar. But he said that is not sufficient. I have to read it with Mubarak Shah. So he traveled all the way from Ma Wara al-Nahr to Egypt to read the book. And it's like 1-volume book. So he traveled that, not with a plane, caravans, together, can I read the book with you? And he's a published, people would point at him. This is Sayyid Sharif, and so on. So, but it also shows that if you put the intention, you will get the benefit. Then he said the fourth, إن لم تجد في نفسك في أوائل التعلم ترقيا تاما في المطالعة فلا تفتر جدك أو فلا يفتر جدك. Can be read both. He says again, he says if you find in the beginning that it's difficult and you're not really elevating in how you read, again, don't lose enthusiasm. He says فإن ما ذكرنا متوقف على معرفة الصلاح الفنون أيضا. He said some of what you mentioned depends on whether you know the language of the science. Meaning, he says, like, don't worry, you will grasp it, it needs time. He's iterating that in so many different ways. Then al-wasiyya, which everybody loves. He says, the advice, إياك أن تحفظ الألفاظ من غير أن تفهم المعاني المراد منها. Never memorize words that you don't understand their meanings. I usually get this, every time I teach this, I get the question. Does that apply to the Quran? No. That's an exception. That's an exception. But meaning textbooks, mutun. Don't memorize what you don't understand. But I included in the law, you're going to find like 2 pages of annotation. Because I mentioned that there was a line within our tradition that used memorization as a way to help understanding. So some of the linguists, I think Abu Bakr ibn Sarraj, he said, إذا لم تفهموا كلامي فاحفظوه. If you don't understand my words, then memorize them. فإذا حفظتموه فهمتموه. If you memorize them, then you will understand them. So some scholars would use memorization to allow the mind to reflect on the words even without the book not being in front of them. So in transportation, as they recite the verses in the poem, they're thinking about the meaning. So with that purpose, however, having said that, no scholar ever said memorize for the sake of memorization. That's not there. So those who said memorize and emphasize memorization, even when you don't understand, it was for the purpose of understanding, or to allow you to teach off the cuff without having the book in front of you. So it makes teaching more accessible. But memorization in and of itself is not championed. It has to be for a purpose. So either that you memorize to be able to reflect on what you memorized easily and you have great access to the text. You don't have to hold it with you, keep it with you. It's in your mind, so you have a recollection of it and you can think of it even when you are, in the car, not driving, but, in transportation, at home, in bed, while eating. It's in your mind, so you think about it. طيب, that is okay. Or it allows you to teach and connect sciences together for that purpose, okay. Right? And also when you are asked about questions, so you need to give references, fine, for that purpose also. But so in other words, yes, memorization is respected in our tradition, but respected for a purpose. Some teachers present it as if it's required in and of itself. So you can go around, I memorized al-alfiyah. Okay, can you explain it? No. طيب وبعدين, now we have another copy of it. And then what? فهمت قصدي? But I can teach al-alfiyah without without needing a book. ما شاء الله, هذا علامة في النحو. You get my point. So memorization is not required. Also, I mentioned things in there related to the mental capacities that are required in memorization. They are contrary, opposite to the mental capacities that are required for reasoning. So the more, obviously that is not related to somebody who has an enlightened aql and heart. We're talking in principle. The more you memorize, the less you reason. Because the mental capacity that it requires for memorization is opposite to what is required for reasoning. They explain it like this. Memorization requires things to be engraved. Reasoning requires movement. So the mind that reasons a lot, it's always in movement. So it's like writing on sand. So the water comes, it washes it away. But the mind that memorizes, things are still in it. So this is why Ibn Sina says you cannot find people who reach the highest level in memorization and also the highest level of reasoning. That's the norm. You can find exceptions. You can find Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, Imam Shafi'i. These are exceptions. But when you look in the Ummah, you don't find it that way. Those who are top level in reasoning, you don't find them. They memorize, but not as... And this is prevalent in the narrators of hadith, for example. And they speak about that they narrate, but they don't know the meaning. And you find Ibn Wahb the Maliki says, al-hadithu madilla, illa ala al-fuqaha, or illa al-fuqaha, something of that sort. Meaning people can be misguided because they memorize. Because they keep memorizing, and that lures them, it gives them a false image that they're scholars, but they're not. So it's not about how much you memorize, it's about how you understand. But also, if you understand very well, but you don't have an encompassing memory of what is being said and where and so on and so forth, then it's like having a machine, but you don't know how to use it in a sense as well. Reasoning and memorization, these are tools for scholarship. What is the objective in our tradition is not the memorization nor the reasoning. You don't reason for the sake of reasoning in and of itself. You reason to become a scholar. So that is the aim. So you need to memorize for the purposes that would help you become a scholar and for the amount that is sufficient to become a scholar. But if that memorization goes beyond, and then that sacrifices the reasoning, then you're not on the right path of scholarship. And else, also, if you get too much into the reasoning, that is also not good. It is mentioned that Al-Farabi developed depression. It's mentioned by Shaykh Hassan Al-Attar in his commentary on Tadhkarat Dawood in medicine. So he mentioned that Al-Farabi developed al-marad al-sawda, like a form of a melancholia, because of the too much reasoning. So he used to get into fights with merchants because they're not accurate in the words they use. And he would take them to court. Why? Because he's applying the definitions. And he would ask about something and they respond about something else, and he would get furious at them. You're stupid. I'm not asking about this. I'm asking about that. Be definitive in your answer. Why aren't you answering my question? I ask you about this and you speak about something else. And the judges, they used to laugh. But he got depressed from that because he couldn't deal with people normally. It's like, a husband dealing with his wife or vice versa with Isa Ghuji. I love you. Define love. And then you say something, wrong definition. I have a critique. Then people won't live with each other. So it's like, asking her, for example, could you please, warm my food? And it becomes too hot. I didn't say make it hot. I said make it warm. I was explicit in what I said. It happens with the ulama, right? If I wanted to say heated, I would have said heated, but I didn't. I said make it warm, right? But we shouldn't do that, right? But it slips, see, because of the too much reasoning. Shaykh Hassan Attar says that that people have that the different careers people have, it affects their biology, not just their way of thinking, their biology. So sometimes scholars, they get intricate. You're not answering what I'm saying. Sometimes it would happen with my kids. I ask him, how did you do in the exam? So he'd respond, it was easy. I didn't ask how you feel about it. I asked, what did you do in the exam? That would apply. I mean, you shouldn't do that with a child like me. So this is one of the things that I repent from. But And it also, sometimes it happens with me. Like, I'll be in an Uber and I say, can you please take the next right? So he continues, like he doesn't come near the right turn. And then he continues and he goes like, this one? Habibi, that's why I said the next one back there, right? So, and it happens a lot. Every time saying, we're going to take the next right. And for some reason, like, they don't believe me. Wallahi, like, I don't know what's the reason. Every time saying the next, it's the same place in every journey when I'm returning home. I'm gonna, the next right. And then they keep going on in their path normally. And then as we approach it, this one, yes, that's why I said back there, next right. But then, like, like one day I came back, like I told my wife, I don't know what to do. It happens with me every day, every time. She said maybe, well, they're used that people are not like precise. So many people would say the next right and they mean the one after it. So they got used that people don't use precise terms. So they're always in doubt that you don't mean what you're saying. So when they come to a person who's actually meaning what they say, they're like doubtful. No, you don't mean it. It becomes a problem, wallahi. Why would I say the next right if it wasn't this one? So, ربنا يستر, I'm moving into a Farabi type of This is why sometimes you would need to, some of the sciences, like, you would have to take a pause. Because it can get into you, and that would affect how you deal with people around you. You should not assume every Uber driver studied, like the art of reading and the, yes, and like, why didn't you read my text message and, understand what is explicit and implicit and the qualifiers I mentioned in it, right? So he said, إياك وأن تحفظ ألفاظ من غير أن تفهم المعاني المرادة منها فإنه يورث البلادة وعوجاج الطبيعة. Meaning that البلادة has a definition. البلادة literally would mean somebody who is, look, in a nice way, somebody who is struggling academically. Slow in comprehending scholarly matters. But the way Abu al-Baqa al-Kifavi explains it, he says, البلادة هي فتور الطبع من الابتهاج إلى المحاسن العقلية. He's saying that to have a mindset that loses the passion to uncover intellectual realities. That is al-balada. To lose the passion and the zeal to unveil, to uncover the realities, or to uncover intellectual realities. Because saying when you get into the norm of memorizing words without understanding the meaning, you're developing this mindset. He says, بل ربما يصلب قابلية الإدراك بالكلية. You might even lose, like have a very weakened capacity of apprehension. Then he mentions something very interesting. He says, وإياك وأن تنظر فيها نظرا إجماليا غير أن تعقبه دقة النظر والاستبصار. فإن ذلك أيضا من سوالب الإدراك ومورثات البلادة والإعوجاج في الطباع. He said, never scan through a scholarly book if you don't have the time and the intention to follow that scanning with deep reading. He's not talking about buying the book at a bookstore. But some students of knowledge, they do that. They come, the book is difficult, but they're not in the right mood, not the right time, whatever it may be, or they don't have the ability and they're not willing to do effort. This has at least two or three problems. One, so they open the book, they scan, but as they're scanning, they're realizing, oh my God, what am I doing to myself? This is so difficult. This is what's going on in their mind. This is way beyond, above my head. I don't know how I'm going to figure that. So they they get the, on the surface meaning, and then they close the book. And then they keep doing that. Number one, they develop the habit of not being able to actually discern and to do deep reading. Khalas. It becomes like an addiction, a habit that they don't know how to lose. Two, they have a false impression. They think, because the way they do it a lot, and they may do the scanning over and over again of the same passage. So that will give them a false impression, an illusion that they know what it says, but they don't. This is similar to highlighting. You know, by the way, empirically proven that highlighting is not a good way to study. Some people, they're fond of this, you know, coloring stuff, and they bring all different colors, you know, yellow, orange, purple, green, and they have their own istilah as well, terminology, the yellow for the concepts, the red for the problematic matters, the green for, you know, the fawaid, and this and that, and they color it. Right? It's like they're doing a, what's it called, like mandala. Right? So they do the mandala of the, you know, the hashia on whatever, طيب, of al-Bujirmi, for example. خلاص, you finish coloring. MashaAllah, beautiful coloring. Okay, explain what's in the book. I don't know. So why did you color it? What were you doing? So what happens is that when they color the book, it appears to them that they read it, but they didn't. They take things by the outer appearance, and accordingly they color. And then if they do that for an exam, let's say for actual, you know, academic study, when they come to prepare for the exam, they're going to read only what they highlighted. What if you make a wrong choice? So back in the day, I used to highlight. I sold all the books that I highlighted in. Yeah, because I feel embarrassed from them, to be quite like. So yeah, because yeah, like I mean, so that was like 20 years ago. You know, the books that I used to do highlighting like 2004 or something. And then like a few years after, you know, 2006, 2007, you know, dealing with teachers, and then when, you know, sort of like slowly growing in knowledge. And then I go back to some of the books I highlighted 2004. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why did I even highlight that? Right? You would highlight things that are utterly not important. So I was like, you know what? I won't highlight again. But actually, that's empirically proven. It lures you, that it gives you that false assumption. I studied while you didn't. Two, you highlight stuff and then you regret it also. So now you ruin the book because it has all different, you know, flamboyant colors for no other reason, right? And then the third, that when you come to read the book, it doesn't allow your eye to fall on some of the aspects on the pages that you didn't give enough attention to before. So every time you read the book, you're going to read the same highlighted statement. What benefit are you getting? Perhaps you need to examine a different part in that text. See? So these are just three reasons. I think I was going to mention something else as well regarding highlighting. So the problem with doing the scanning, this is correlated with something related in tasawwuf. When you are extremely ambitious, but at the same time extremely lazy. This is the look, right, this extremely ambitious plus extremely lazy equals envious. هكذا. تريد أن تكون حسودا, have great ambitions and great laziness. Then you'll start envying people when they succeed. So this is correlated to here. Why? Because people of that type of mentality, they usually only apply the scanning because they want to justify and to answer their ambition. But at the same time, they're not willing to put in the effort. But at the same time, I'm ambitious. How do I prove that I'm ambitious? Do the scanning. Easy to do. So, and then time after time, they think that they're scholars, but they're not. And real scholars know that they're not. So they don't get the attention from the real scholars. So they start envying their peers who actually, you know, moved up the ladder. They say, how come they give him that opportunity and I'm not giving that opportunity? And sometimes they will say, no, but I read more books than he did. You scanned them. See? But meanwhile, your peer might have read only one book, but like 20, 30 times, every time he learned new things. You made a scan of like 100 books. Okay, so you have some fawaid here and there, but you didn't actually study the book. See? This is prevalent now in among students of knowledge. They buy a lot of books, they do a lot of scanning, but then they don't really invest time in the mashakil, in the problems of the books. And then when they find somebody succeeding, say, oh man, he doesn't deserve it. I have more books. So that's the formula for envy. How is it applied on the ground? Through this. This is what justifies, what satisfies the extreme ambition, and at the same time, you can still be lazy. See? تفضل. Speed reading was used in our tradition to revise. That's it. Speed reading doesn't apply to anything of what we said. Not even the scamming. And speed reading is actually a scam. Yeah. Sorry to say that. I mean, you cannot speed read and do reading like this at the same time. Unless you're a machine or something. But, I mean, for human beings, they don't. Unless you're, you're a grandchild of a, Chat GPT or something. I'm not saying you personally. I didn't mean that. I'm just saying في المطلق, in absolute sense. So it just doesn't work that way. So a lot of people in the Arab world, they came and they did these sort of like extremely expensive courses. Have you eat like 30 books in a week and stuff like that? Okay, fine. And they may even remember it after a week. Okay, but the issue is not to remember. Okay, can you explain the book? Can you bring out the problems in the book? Can you have a response to the problems? Can you address the controversial issues in the problem? Can you support the evidence, bring other evidence? This is how you're supposed to, so in our tradition, they would only read one text in a science, but of 3 different levels. And there's somebody who compiled actually, I think there's a book called المشوق إلى القراءة. He gathers a number of different examples of how scholars who used to read like one book 200 times, things like that. Some scholars in our tradition, they have appellation, they have like a title because of the relationship to a book. Like Al-Kafiyaji, for example. He's named Al-Kafiyaji because of the many times he read Al-Kafiya. So he became a pioneer in Kafiyat ibn al-Hajib. So he became called Al-Kafiyaji. Like a specialist in Al-Kafiya. So scholars used to do that. I think Al-Muzani or somebody else said, I read either Al-Umm or Al-Risala of Imam al-Shafi'i so many times, and every time I read it, I understand something new. So how are you going to do that if you speed read? Yes, you can speed read to revise or to memorize maybe, or revising memorization, something of that sort. But speed reading and the art of deep reading, you cannot reconcile them. That is a marriage that wouldn't work. لا يوجد كفاءة. There's no compatibility between the 2 spouses here. I don't know if you can actually, let me see if I can read it from here. I wanted to do like an example of a practical example. I'll see if I can do that. And then in the second treatise, I would refer especially students of knowledge to read this part, because you're going to find some of the, okay, so in our tradition, the scholars would use sometimes like command words, Like they would say, for example, تأمل, which is like reflect. Right? But then they would say sometimes say فتأمل, فليتأمل. Um, so they would use different, slight differences. فليتأمل, and that should be reflected upon. And sometimes they say and reflect. And each one of those commands have a different indication of how they conceive. Usually, those who would use those terms are either commentators or authors of super commentaries. So they used to have a scheme of how strong a critique is or how strong an evidence is. Right? And they would use these command words to indicate the strength of the evidence or the critique posed at it in their own point of view. The contemporary students of knowledge, they treat all these words the same way. So the ta'ammal, like falyuta'ammal, like he's just, like they think that the author is telling them just reflect on it, read it again. But you're gonna find scholars have different terminology when it comes to that. They sometimes, if they say in qulta, if you say, and sometimes they would say liqa in qila, if it is said. See, if you say is different than if it is said, different than liqa'ilin an yaqul, for a person to say, and each one would indicate a different level, a different grade, different degree of strength or weakness in the reasoning in the text that they're, their text that they're writing the commentary on. So this is how intricate they were. Yeah. In another treatise, it is mentioned that amongst the sciences that are needed to master the art of reading, besides logic and adab al-bahth, is usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is basically the tools of interpreting texts, basically. Scholars use it to interpret the Quran and Sunnah, but they use it also to interpret books. Hanafis, they have a different approach to usul al-fiqh. But when they read the books, because some of the dilalat are not applicable in the Quran for Hanafis, but are applicable in the books. So every Hanafi has to study usul fiqh according to the school, according to the madhab al-jumhur, because the usul fiqh that is used for the Hanafis to understand the books of scholars is the usul fiqh of al-jumhur. But usul fiqh al-ahnaf is the one that is used by the Hanafis for the Quran and Sunnah. See? So their usul fiqh in interpreting the Quran and Sunnah is limited to the Quran and Sunnah, and the interpretation methods of Shafi'is, Hanbalis, and Malikis of the Quran and Sunnah for Hanafis is not applicable to the Quran and Sunnah, but is applicable to the works of scholars. So in that sense, every Hanafi has to study usul fiqh of Hanafis and usul fiqh of Shafi'is in a sense, but not the other way around. So a Shafi'i doesn't need to study the usul fiqh of Hanafis. But the treatise that mentions that is probably written by a Hanafi. And this is, again, not a lot of Hanafi students know that. وصلنا إلى الختام. طب ممكن ناخد سؤال أو شيء? Somebody has a question? يعني since we يعني direct أو indirect ولكن على الدرجة الأولى يعني if it's like children or nephews, nieces, brother or cousin, not like a second cousin and the type of question. You guys get what I'm trying to say? No? Meaning like either directly related or closely related, but not far related. like not like a far relative, like the cousin, the son of my grandmother's cousin type of far relative. إن شاء الله. شيخ تفضل. The recent, you mean recent in publishing or the last one in being authored? Last one being authored? No, I think last one being authored could be a book that is actually lost, but written by Ibn Badran, the Hanbali scholar. Ibn Badran is in his biography, it is listed that he has a treatise on Mutala'a, but it's not found. So if that is found, then that will be the most recent one. And there might be a book. Yeah, so I think, Ibn Badran's is the most recent, but there's a contemporary book in Urdu on Adab al-Mutala as well. Yeah. The chapter on deep reading by Professor Khalid Rouaihib, and there's a translation. The book will be retranslated because it's actually a more of a modern rephrasing of the text in a sense. But there is an English translation of Fayd al-Haram. Yeah. And then there are some. Yeah, these are the two that I can think of in English. I think if you write Faydal, like FAYDAL-HARAM, and then Imam Ghazali Publishing, then you're gonna find it was and the translator named Mikael Smith. Good question. I was expecting that. بينهم عموم وخصوص. So, no. Because, okay. So there are treatises that are written in a field that they called Adab al-Fahm, which is the etiquette or the art of comprehension, and the etiquette of conveying al-Ifham. So, the earliest treatise in that is written by Shaykh Muhammad Ali Tahlawi, and then explained by Al-Allama Al-Amir Thamar Al-Thumam. Both are late Azhari Malikis. Now, and then there's a book, but I couldn't find the manuscript of it, by Shaykh Al-Azhar Muhammad Al-Ahmadi Al-Zawahiri on Adab al-Fahm as well. But Adab al-Fahm is about how to understand whether the words are written or vocalized. And it doesn't focus on how to critique, how to question, but only how to understand. Okay? And then it has also to do with al-ifham, whether you do that in writing or whether you do that verbally. So the part that overlaps is how to understand what is written. How to understand what is verbal doesn't apply to adab mutala. How to convey, whether verbally or written form, doesn't apply to adab mutala. So it only overlaps. Yeah. So بينهم عموم وخصوص وجهي. Yeah. Some etiquettes of mutala'a are also adab fahm. Some adab fahm are also adab mutala'a, but not every adab fahm is adab mutala'a, not every adab mutala'a is adab fahm. So they do that. And then there, by the way, there are treatises that are written in adab al-ta'lif, the art of writing. That is also a field. And what are the duties, the responsibilities of an author, and how to structure the book, and things like that. Adab al-ta'lif. There's a late Iraqi scholar who authored a book on Adab al-Ta'lif. You find some يعني شذرات هكذا, some matters related to Adab al-Ta'lif in the one of the introductions of Kashf al-Dhunun by Haji Khalifa, and the Shaykh Abu al-Barakat al-Sindi, لو تعرفوه. He sent me years back a manuscript by an unknown author from India who wrote a treatise on how to, in a very concise form, on how to write a book, not how to read one. Yeah. So what are the duties, responsibilities of an author? So they, لمؤلف مجهول. The students will know, خلاص, this is somebody we don't know, so we won't read it. So you have to do it in a way that really grasps people to, buy it. Okay. Obviously, some of the detailed advice won't apply, but in terms of examining conceptualizations and propositions, in terms of considering the evidence that is used, in terms of making sure that you understand the terminologies, it's still applicable. But obviously, in some cases, you cannot really treat it so serious because of the way it is authored. In fact, so remember when I said every type of writing dictates a type of reading? So Imam al-Shatibi resented to write in that concise, compact form like other scholars used to do. Actually, many of the Magharibis didn't like that. And you were doing a tahqiq of a Maghribi scholar, right? This is why the Maghariba, for example, they like Sharh al-Maqasid over Sharh al-Mawaqif. Sharh al-Mawaqif is more concise. Sharh al-Maqasid is more loose in words, for example. So I believe it was Sayyid Abdullah ibn Siddiq al-Ghumari. He had a position regarding the works of Imam al-Shatibi. He said that great scholar, but he writes as if he's writing a journal. He doesn't write like Ibn al-Hajib or al-Baydawi or Taj al-Subki, right? Where you can actually, unpack the words and treat, because the way we also understand the word, you understand what we call ma'na al-mutabiq, you understand the word in and of itself, right? Which we call the indication of complete accord, دلالة المطابقة. And then there is دلالة التضمن, what it encompasses, partial accord. And then there is دلالة الاستلزام, which is I forgot what they call it in English, meaning what the words entail, what the words necessitate. Okay. So you can only benefit from these indications if you're writing in a compound, concise form, and every word that is written is required. Because you find in some of the commentaries and the super commentaries, when they sometimes find a word that doesn't bring any sort of addition, they point out, they say hashwun. They say this is the unneeded word. Every word has to be for a reason, right? So any word that is used without utter reason, you're just elaborating, reiterating. They detested that. But Imam al-Shatibi can sometimes go on passages saying the same thing over and over. So when Maulana Dr. Ali Jum'ah, when he said what he said about Imam al-Shatibi, some people got really furious. But then, our Shaykh Ahmed Mamdouh, he's then, brought the excerpt from, I believe, Sayyid Abdullah ibn Siddiq, if I recall correctly, who actually had that position. Because, see, the line of scholarship of Imam al-Shatibi detested a compact form of authorship, right? So he actually relates that to his Shaykh. And he relates that, I believe, Imam ibn Arafah Tunsi, When he visited the Shaykh of al-Shatibi, the Shaykh of al-Shatibi said, what benefit does this bring? If you write in such form, well, the advanced scholars don't need it, and the beginners, they won't understand it. So when you read the last part of Al-Mukhtasar al-Fiqhi, which is by the way volumes, but Al-Mukhtasar al-Fiqhi by Ibn Arafah, you find him at the end, he started to have a loosened structure of words because he was affected by that. But that line was present for some of the Magharibi scholars. They resented the compact form. The Ajam, meaning the scholars of the East, the Indians, the Persians, they're in love to bring in so many meanings in less words. Like this is what they compete. Their competition. How can we pack so? And we mentioned that in the introductions. They say this book summarizes 100 books in one. Imam Taj Subki said that about Jam' al-Jawami. He said, وَلَخَصْتُهُ مِنْ نَحْوِ مِئَةِ مُصَنَّف. He brought 100 books, and then he did that in a very, in one volume. So he says, لَخَصْتُهُ مِنْ زَهَاءِ مِئَةِ مُصَنَّف أو هكذا قال. So they had that passion. How can I mention so many meanings in very little words? The Magharibas, no. They love, more relaxed, loosened statements, and that are more melodic, eloquent, تعرف. You find that in the writings. So, and by the way, this meaning, Sara permeated to the Moroccan sort of Sufi saints. So you find that in Sidi ibn Mashish, you find that Sidi Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili, you find that in Imam al-Busiri, not the loosened, but I mean the eloquence in the language. Even until this very day. Listen to Shaykh Mustafa al-Bihyawi. You find, statements that are so eloquent, you find rhyme in them without takalluf, without you feel that he's going out of his way to make it rhyme. It just flows out of him. That is very different than the words of Al-Ajam. Al-Ajam is like you're reading a code of a programming language. Wallahi, it's like, if not, then this. And then if that, then this. And if that, then this or that. And if A, then B or C. And then if B, then da-da-da. And you get lost in charting what they're saying. So that was their style. But they detested that Moroccan way of writing. Maybe one hand, because you cannot really apply that art of reading precisely upon it, because which passage of these two in which you reiterated the same opinion, which one should we deem the representative of your opinion? Which one? You find that in the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah as well. We cannot really apply art of deep reading to the works of Ibn Taymiyyah. Very difficult to apply them. Why? Because he sometimes goes in circles, and then but you can benefit, but you cannot apply it word by word. You can benefit when you realize sometimes Ibn Taymiyyah makes claims. You would often find it a lot in his verdicts. He says, وَهَذَا مَا ذَهَبَ إِلَيْهِ أَئِمَّةُ الْمَذَاهِبِ الْأَرْبَعَةِ. You find that a lot when he speaks about creed. This is what all the four madhahib have said. And then when you actually look for a trail, when you track this, where did they say that? But he would usually do like a shahn, he would bring out attribute, opinions to very, 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 very early in the tradition where you cannot actually trace it. And then he would make this is why, let me conclude by that. I don't know if that's a good conclusion. But Safiuddin al-Hindi was an Indian scholar of Shafi'i, scholar of Usul Fiqh. When he used to debate Ibn Taymiyyah, he used to tell him, you're like a bird. Every time I come to catch you, run to a different issue. And that is present in his books. You cannot have a logical sequence of ideas. Ibn Qayyim tried to do that. But Ibn Taymiyyah himself, you cannot find a sequence. The only sequence that he did was that he did in Al-Wasitiyya, which made people think that God is a human being. because he brought all the attributes that are ambiguous and he lists them all one after the other, which no one of the Salaf ever done. So he would say the attribute of face, the attribute of hand, the attribute of leg, the attribute of feet. And then when we say to him, okay, so you make tashbih? No, I don't. See? So this, he does not, لا يريد أن يلتزم بلوازم كلامه. His approach entails, necessitates certain conclusions. He doesn't want to defend the conclusions. No, I didn't say. I would actually, this is a better conclusion. The books that you read at the very early stage in your, seeking the traditional sciences affects your approach throughout. Yeah. Off the record, I can share some examples, inshallah. But they affect your attitude to the knowledge throughout afterwards. So if this is the norm, this is what you experience at the very beginning, then any other rigorous writing, scholarly writing, will be foreign to you. So some students, unfortunately, they were introduced into the traditional sciences through some of the books of the Wahhabis, the Taymis, and so on and so forth. Then when you present them with books that are compact and concise, they resent it. You complicate knowledge. Knowledge is not supposed to be complicated. Because this is what, Islam is easy. Why do you do that? Yeah, but, okay, so try to read any code of law of any country and interpret it. See, because scholars used to write like, it's a code. Every word is made for a reason. Every explicit indication is meant. Every implicit indication is also ought to be investigated. So, the style of writing and the personal mindset and attitude of the author. Without mentioning names, but one of the very famous Salafi preachers of Egypt, the first book that he read in his life, fiqh, was Al-Muhalla by Ibn Hazm. So Ibn Hazm, by the way, Ibn Hazm I think he was diabetic. I think he mentioned that in one of the books. So he would sometimes, when he write, he get like fired up, he get fiery. And he said, I couldn't help it. So, like, if somebody says like, okay, هذا, this in Tirmidhi, he says, ولا يعرف من هو. Who is Tirmidhi? And then he would come to some aspects and say, وهذه فتوى يهودية. This is a Jewish verdict to some of the opinions. He was very harsh. So that Salafi preacher, that was the first book he read. So that was reflected. Some of the statements that he said about, he is known for hadith. So some of the, or supposedly, so some of the statements he made, but he repented. Again, he repented from the word I'm gonna say now. He said to Imam Ibn al-Madini, who was the teacher of Imam Bukhari, he wrote a book to do takhrij of a hadith, and he wanted to critique the teacher of Imam Bukhari. Okay, how did he critique him? He said, ما هكذا تعلل الأخبار يا ابن المديني. This is not the way, you discern or critique narrations, O Ibn al-Madini, like that. He repented. He said, I regret saying that. Okay, good. Alhamdulillah that he regretted in the dunya, because otherwise he would know in the akhirah. So alhamdulillah, he knew in the dunya. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that, because at the end of the day, he's a Muslim. But the issue is that what he has to be concerned with, and his followers and so on and so on, what made you do that? Because of what you began to read with, Al-Muhalla. So you read a scholar who's very aggressive, then you gotta be aggressive for the remainder of your scholarship. Yeah. Walhamdulillah. جزاكم الله تعالى خير وبارك الله تعالى فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.